Howdy folks, Troy with V-Twins and V8s. I'm back today and I'm going to work with you a little bit today on getting your parts primed, sanding your primer, the primer to use, how to reduce it, how to apply it, and how to use it. So what I have here is I have a panel from a project that I'm doing, a 64 Chrysler Imperial. I also used some of the parts in a previous video I did on prepping your metal and doing your repairs with the pick and file method and not relying so much on plastic body filler. You can check that out in one of my links up above. But anyway, so what I did was to this particular trunk lid, what I did was I stripped the whole thing, then I picked and filed the entire panel and got it straight and smooth. Then I D8'd it down sequentially from 36 to 80 to 180, and then I applied this primer surfacer that you see on here. I used black. The primer surfacer that I like to use is a product that I get from the House of Color folks. It's called KD 3000, and KD 3000 hardener you need, and you'll need some reducer to do different things. I use RU310. It's a fast reducer. I find it's best in the summertime when it gets a little bit warmer. Then I'll go to 311. It's a little bit of a slower reducer. The thing with the that I like about the KD 3000 is it's a direct to steel primer. In other words, you don't have to put down any special etching primer, anti-corrosive primer, any of that stuff. Once your panel is cleaned and once your panel is sanded and prepped and washed clean with a pre-cleaner, you're ready to go ahead and apply your primer surfacer. So what I like to do with a project like this, where I have some pretty deep scratches and gouges when I filed it and picked it and hammered it, the first thing I like to do is I put down 3 coats of this and I use it as more or less like a filling base, like a high build primer. Now to do that with this particular product is pretty easy. You take 4 parts of your 3000, your actual sealer or primer, and you take 1 part of this, you don't use any reducer, and then you mix that together. I laid down 3 coats of that on here. Okay, once I have this laid down on here, I let this dry. I like to let my primer dry as long as I can. The longer this primer dries, the more it's going to settle out, the more it's going to shrink or whatever it's going to do. I like to think about my primer and tell people about how it shrinks or settles in the same way as like if you dig a hole in the ground. If you dig a hole in the ground, you shovel it out, you dig your little hole, you put whatever you got to do inside the hole, you take your dirt, you put it back in, and you tamp it down and everything, and you rake it over, it's nice and smooth. A week later, the dirt settles. A month later, it settles even more. If you drive over with the car, it settles even more. Before you know it, you got to dip and you've got to add more material in. The same kinds of things happens with body work. Every time you put a layer of material on, it has to solidify and it tends to want to pull itself back. It tends to want to shrink and solidify and compress itself. So if I can wait a week or 2 weeks after I've applied this primer and then sand it, I'm pretty confident that that's going to be pretty well settled down. If I could wait longer, I would, but I mean 2 weeks is still kind of a long time when you're trying to do a project. What I tend to do is I get a piece all done like this, I get it primed, I move on to my other pieces. By the time I get all the way through, you know, trunk lid, hood, doors, fenders, quarters, all that, by the time I get back around, this has been sitting for about a week or 2. So today, this is my first application. I did it in black. And now I'll alter my different applications. So my first application I laid down in black. Now I'm going to sand this, and I'm going to sand it because I know I'm going to reprime it. So in other words, I'm going to use this primer to fill in some grinding marks and stuff like that I have on this surface. So I'm going to use it as like a hard surfacer. Some people will sand this stuff dry and then reapply. Some people will sand it wet. I kind of like to sand it wet because I don't have the dust all over the place. It doesn't clog up the paper. I just would rather do it that way. I sand enough stuff dry, I just don't like it. So now that we've got the basis of the primer sealer down, I'm gonna do my initial sanding here I'm going to take this stuff out of the way. Because this is my first application, I sprayed it black. I know it looks kind of gray right now. I sprayed it black, and then I guide coated it with some flat white that I had hanging around. So it gives it kind of like this grayish white look. That is going to show me all my low spots. As you're looking, if you watch my video on picking and filing, or my other videos on doing different bodywork things, if you check them out, it shows you the whole guide coating process. You're going to see it again right now anyways. It's just already been applied. All it is a dusting of paint that's in a contrasting color to your original surface, your substrate. And when you sand it, it'll show you all your low spots. So I'm going to move this stuff out of the way. I'm going to get some my sandpaper ready. Like I said, I like to sand my primer surfacer wet. It prevents a lot of dust and mess all over the place on me and everything. I don't have to wear a dust mask. I don't have to do any of that stuff. It allows me to keep my paper clean. My paper lasts longer, so I like to do it wet. So this is my first application. So my first application on this particular project, I'm going to sand this wet with some 220. And I'm going to sand this whole trunk lid with 220 so that I can come back and reapply primer surfacer again to take care of whatever I need to and give myself a base. Because as you'll see, once we sand this, I'll be sanded through it all over the place. I might have some spots I may have to touch up, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So stay tuned, we'll get a close-up, and we'll get our paper ready, and we'll get to some sanding, and you can see how it's done. Okay, so here we go. So we've got our various blocks that I talk about in some of my other videos. I've got the longer and flatter the panel, the longer and flatter the block you want to use. I have this one here, I have this rubber one, and I have these Durablocks that you can use in all different areas. Right now we're just going to focus on a flat area so you can see how this is done. So I'll just put these on the side. I've got a bucket with some fairly warm water in it, and I'm going to wear a pair of gloves because I like to wear gloves so I don't get all the stuff underneath my fingernails and everything else, and then when your hand's in the water for a long time, they get all pruny and mushy, not really into it. So I got 220 on my block, I got my panels clean, and I'm just going to start sanding this. And as I start to sand this, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about as far as it's showing you your imperfections. So what's going to happen is as you start to sand it, you're going to end up with a situation. Let me just get a paper towel so that you can take a look at this. So as you can see, I got just black showing here, but I can still see all these other marks. Those are areas that are low, and I need to continue sanding that. So as I sand it, I'll start to remove all of those low areas, and I'll just continue to work this. Now if you watch my other videos, you'll know I always like to sand in multiple directions. That way there I don't end up with sanding groove marks from my fingers or from my blocks or whatever it is that I may be using. This primer sands pretty easily, especially with 220 grit paper, because 220 grit paper is pretty aggressive. But that's the whole idea, is to knock this down quickly, get down to all my problem areas. So I will continually just keep sanding this until I get this whole corner done, and then I can look at it, check my low areas, and keep going. I'm starting to see a little bit of metal show through over here, so therefore I have either sanded too much, or I've got a high spot there that I might have to take a look at, but that's really what's going on. What this allows is for you to just make quick progress of this. You can use a squeegee if you don't want to use a lot of paper towels. That works well. I just didn't have one handy right at the moment. As you'll notice, my paper's not building up with sanding dust because the water helps to remove that. As you're watching me sand this, you'll see those areas where it's low, and I'll focus on the areas where the white is. And basically, if you watch my pick and file video, it's going to look an awful lot like this. But what I'm basically doing is I'm using this primer surfacer to smooth and level and make my area flat and smooth. Now, as you can see, I'm pretty good. I mean, I got a few spots. I just got to keep working it out. And I will continue to sand this until I sand this whole thing. I'm going to go off camera and I'm just going to work on sanding this for a while. I'll come back on and we'll take a look at it and we'll see what we have. And I'll just walk you through this whole thing. After we're done with this, we'll reprime it. Okay, so we're back here on the project. I got the thing all blocked out down with 220 wet. I dried it off. I'm taking a look at it. As you can see, all of these metal spots are all little tiny high spots. So some of them really are just cut throughs and it won't really matter, like the one down the center I'm not really worried about. But some of these are a little bit higher than I'd like them to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my body hammer and I'm just going to tap very, very lightly on some of these high spots, and I'll put just a little bit of glaze coat. On this area right here that I have, I'll bring this camera over so we can get a better look at it. On this area here that I have, you can see it's low in these areas where my guide coat is still at, and then it's high here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably tap down these couple areas here, and then I'll put some glaze coat across here, and I'll blend all this right back into here. I mean, we're not talking very much because you can see I sanded some of it off, so it's pretty close. But nonetheless, I mean, it definitely is here. So I'm going to go ahead and get my little body hammer. I'm going to tap some of these down. I'll mix up some glaze coat. I'll feel this whole thing really good. I'll find I got a couple of little grooves right here I don't particularly care for, and I don't want to chase them any lower because of these high spots. So I'll just skim coat those with a little bit of glaze, and then I'll have to block that out. We'll come back, I'll apply the putty tonight, and tomorrow I'll come back, we'll get this blocked out tomorrow, and then hopefully should be ready for some primer. So stay tuned. Alright folks, so I'm back here on the project. I got everything sanded down. What I did was, like I just kind of recapped, I tapped down the spots that I thought were going to be a problem, and then I applied some glaze coat in some areas. I pointed this area out to you here, and I put some in here and I smoothed this out pretty nicely. And then I had a little bit of a high spot and another high spot here, and I had it seemed like it was kind of low, so I feathered it back into the adjacent areas. Same with like this here, and there's a couple over here. I mean, this stuff is really, really thin. I'll bring the camera really close. You can see where I made some circular marks as far as what I thought was areas that needed some attention, and you can pretty much still see the pen marks through my filler. So I'm going to bring the other camera, I'll bring it right up close, you'll be able to see exactly what I got going on. This particular area here was where we had a few low spots and a few high spots. I put this, this glaze coat here, and I ran it up to this center body line. Then I did the same thing from this other side over here and ran it up this way, and then I sanded it to blend all of this together. So now I got that there, this spot over here, this is like where I was talking about. So I made a circular mark so I knew where I needed to apply some glaze coat, and as you can see right through my filler. That's how thin this stuff is on here. I mean, it just basically just kind of smooths things over and blends everything together. The same here. You can see, like, you can see the high spot right through it, and it just kind of makes everything blend together and be nice and smooth. I'm back, and I'm going to do this priming on this trunk lid we've been working on. First thing I'm going to do is I got my area prepared. I'm suited up. I got all my gear out. Here's my trunk lid. I'm going to wash it down with some House of Color KC10. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to put some KC10 on a rag, and we are going to wet the area in small sections, and then use the dry towel to dry it off. The idea isn't that this thing has to be soaking wet, but the idea is to clean this so that we can remove any contaminants, wax, grease, oils from my skin, things of that nature, so that we won't have any adhesion problems or fisheye problems in our primer application. So I'm wetting it down with the KC10, and I'm drying it with my dry towel. I had done this once yesterday, but much like the rest of this paint situation, what you want to do is spend most of your time in preparation and the smallest amount of your time actually doing it. Preparation is the key to all of this. As I go along, I'll continually turn my rag so that if I have any dirt or anything on it, I'm using a clear area, both of these rags. So here we go. I'm trying not to saturate my polyester putty with the cleaner. Kind of just gloss over it, make sure you wipe it dry, and that's pretty much it. So that takes care of this. This is pretty much all set. I'm going to reposition the camera, and you can watch me get my gun and my primer ready. I got my handy HVLP primer gun. It's all put together. It's all set up and ready to go. I've got a strainer to strain my primer with. This is my KD3000. I want to make sure it's stirred up well, so I don't have anything on the bottom. So open this up. Notice I have gloves on, keeps my hands clean, and it keeps contaminants from the paint as well. So I got this all clean. I am going to stir this up. Make sure that all the sludge is off of the bottom of this. And it's good to go. I got my KD3000. So what I am going to do is I have this graduated stick. It's numbered 1 through 12. It really doesn't matter. I am going to put 4 parts of my KD3000 primer and 1 part of my hardener. So if you were to have a stick, you could measure out in 1 inch or 3/4 or a 1/2 inch increments, whatever, as long as it's even, and make 4 of one, 1 of the other. So now that I have my paint ready, I'm just going to take a quick moment and wipe out my cup to make sure that there's nothing in it. I'm going to put my stick, stand my stick right up in there. I'm going to pour my primer in here till I'm at my number 4. So I got my 4 parts, and then I'm going to open up my hardener, and I'm going to pour that so that I have 1 part. I'm going to stir it. pretty good. I mean, it isn't like I'm making a milkshake or anything. And then, once it's stirred up, I'm gonna pour it through the strainer and into my gun. Now I'm good to go. I'll just set my strainer over here. The strainer catches all the crap that might be floating around in the paint. I got my top on there. My air hole is clear. I'm ready to go. My compressor's all aired up. All right, so now I'm gonna get ready to spray. All right, so now I get everything ready to go. I got my chute suit on. I got my rubber gloves on. I got my handy dandy 3M disposable respirator that I'm going to wear. I'm going to drag my hose out. This is all ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and prime it. I've got another camera that I'm going to use so that you can see the priming process. So I'm going to go shut this one off, fire that one up, and I'm going to put some primer on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot all my edges all the way around. Then I'm going to apply the finish to the rest of it. So I'm going to apply the third and final coat. cleaned up, and I got 3 good coats applied here. It's nice and warm in here. It's about 80 degrees, so this should dry up for us nicely. And like I said, I'll let this sit for a week or 2 before I even start thinking about sanding it. So cleanup on the gun is lacquer thinner, and I recommend disassembling the gun, wash it all out, soak all your parts and pieces. Tomorrow I'll come in, reassemble the gun, you know, brush everything up, reassemble the gun, and we're good to go. Howdy folks, I'm back to show you the final product on our prime job. So it's the next day. This is sat in the booth overnight. It's nice and dry. It's super smooth. I'm pretty happy with the way everything looks. More than likely, when I block this out, I'll probably have to lay down a coat of sealer before we apply any finish to it. But like I said, we're going to let this sit for a week or 2 to really settle out nicely. But everything looks really good. I didn't see or feel anything on here that was really jumping out at me that needed anything. But I'll get to know it much better once I sand it. It works kind of much like when you wash your car or wax your car. You notice things that you don't generally notice right off the bat. Same thing kind of happens when you're doing this kind of work. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I'd like you to like my video, or not, or dislike it, whatever, but you know, show some enthusiasm one way or the other. Like my video, subscribe to my videos, watch some of these playlists. I do a lot of things that show people how to do things in the automotive trade. If there's something you'd like me to go over, feel free to mention it down in the comments. In the description below this video, there's a link that says show more. If you click on that, it'll give you a full breakdown of everything that we've gone through and links to all of the products that I use. If you click on those links, it'll bring you right to Amazon or where you can purchase the products that I use. I'd appreciate it if you did that. You're going to buy it anyways. I get a little bit of a kick, not very much, but just enough to cover a little bit of my time and expense and keep me interested. So, Troy with V-Twins to V8s, thanks for tuning in. Good luck with your projects.